And so now we come to part 3 of 3 of NIEM IEPDs. In this last section, we're going to talk about assembling IEPDs, publishing them, and then we're going to talk a little bit about implementation. If you've been going, oh, I can't wait to hear about implementation, don't get excited because I'm not going to tell you how to implement. I'm basically going to punt down the road. Just wanted to warn you up front that you're not going to get a bunch of implementation details, but we'll talk about that when we get there. In terms of our IEPD lifecycle diagram, we've moved around past the 6 o'clock position and we're into assembly and documentation and publishing and implementation. Now we've seen this slide before. I had it way earlier in this whole presentation, probably in part 1 when we're doing the introduction. But here we're looking at it in terms of assembling an IEPD. Just a reminder that IEPDs consist of 2 basic kinds of documents. One's for humans, things like Word documents, UML diagrams, spreadsheets, and the like, and things for computers, XML schema, instance documents, style sheets. Some are required, some are optional, some are technically optional, but circumstances usually require they be there. And there's an IEPD specification that lists them all. Now, we're not going to look at the specification, but let's look at some of the things that the specification lists. Here are a few of the documents designed for human consumption. There's an IEPD main document, the master document, which provides detailed information about an exchange. It's kind of like the big README file, sort of. It's really the one first place to go to find out about the exchange. Background information, process information, all that kind of stuff. It's a master document to tell you what's going on. There's an IEPD changelog to document modifications made to the IEPD and the authors of those changes to the IEPDs so that you can go back, see what's changed, see what version you're currently looking at. There's an IEPD catalog, an index of the different artifacts within the IEPD, including the human readable ones, including the computer readable ones, often hyperlinked. A lot of times it's an HTML file that you can just pull up in a browser and click on to get to the various documents. And then there's IEPD metadata, important information about the characteristics of an IEPD. That's a fancy way of saying who wrote it, who is it designed for, who are the exchange partners, what's the date on the thing, does it have an expiration date, what version is it, information like that about the IEPD itself. A little more detail on these artifacts. The IEPD main document, that master document, contains detailed business and technical information about an exchange. It's kind of the main catch-all for information explaining what the exchange is about. It provides an overview of the exchange and explains design decisions made so that if you see something weird in there, hopefully there's an explanation as to why it looks weird, and hopefully it's a good one. Provides human readable context for an exchange. The exchange itself is just an XML document. We need human readable context so we understand what it is all about, what context does this exchange live within. It's often organized in line with the IEPD lifecycle. So it might have sections that relate specifically to the different parts of the lifecycle. It may be generated as we go through the lifecycle. So it's usually in sync with the lifecycle. And usually by the time you get to the end, you should kind of have the main document pretty much done. It's not something you just do at the end. You do it as you go along, documenting as you go. Then there's the IEPD changelog, which records modifications made to an IEPD, the author who made them, the change date, and the version number it's on. Now these can be integrated into the main document, or they can be an independent file. You can also format them as XML, so that's a possibility as well. In fact, what I would recommend is formatting them as XML and then having a style sheet that turns it into something pretty for humans, and then incorporating the style sheet output into the main document so that it's in both places, so that humans can read it and computers can read the XML. It's a nice way to have both. It should include as much detail as possible. Don't just do, well, version 1, version 2, version 3 by Joe, Tim, and Larry. Don't do that. You want to have some detail as to what actually changed. And today's word processor tools give you a lot of ability to be able to track changes as you go. So it shouldn't be that hard to have a nice detailed changelog so people can see how this thing changed through time. The IEPD catalog is an index of all the artifacts within an IEPD, so basically all the files, both human and computer readable. Currently, we do this as HTML, and so people load up this catalog.html file or whatever it's called in a browser and be able to click on things. In the future, we'd like that to be XML, because XML is a little more descriptive than HTML. So XML is kind of the future direction for the catalog. Keep in mind that you can still open XML and still have hyperlinks and things like that within a browser, so it's not like you're going to lose any functionality. Having the hyperlinks makes it easy for people to navigate between artifacts, and the catalog is intended for both humans and computers to consume and use, which is why we'd like to move it to XML, because then it's a little easier for the computers to consume in a meaningful way. Now, the IEPD metadata is information about the IEPD itself. So that's what we're talking about. Some of it's required, some of it's optional. Here's a list of what's currently required in terms of metadata for an IEPD. Some sort of universal identifier, a name for it, a summary, creation date, versioning number, the NIEM version, which version of the NIEM is this IEPD built to, maturity level, which domains are involved, what's the purpose of it, any authoritative source for it, and a point of contact name, email, and phone. These are all things that are required. There are some other ones that are optional. But the important thing about metadata is you really want to provide good metadata, because that's how people will find your IEPD in a repository later on so that it can be reused. So it's important to put the metadata in and to really be conscientious about that. So if you take a look at the specification for IEPDs, and you'll see the list of documents there, keep in mind it's not exclusionary. If you think of something else that would be good to put in an IEPD, go ahead and put it in the IEPD. The list in the specification is a list of things we'd really like to see in an IEPD, but it's not a limited list. You're not limited to just what's there. If you can think of more stuff, good. Because in general, the more artifacts and the better documentation, the better the quality of the IEPD. If you've got something that helps explain the IEPD, include it. Include it in the IEPD. There's no real cost to that unless it's some trillion terabyte size file. There's no reason not to add it. So the more the better. If you've got information that makes the IEPD better, then add it to the IEPD. Don't treat the list of artifacts as some sort of exclusionary list. We talked about some of the major artifacts in an IEPD, but here's some other potential additions. Things like documents for humans, well, memos of understanding, information on the methodology and tooling used, the conformance testing you did, any best practices you found or used, endorsement letters, and implementation details. These things would all be valuable in an IEPD. Documents for computers, well, sample XML instances, style sheets, WSDL definitions if you're doing web services, as well as SOAP message files. That kind of implementation information can be very valuable, even though implementation is really outside the scope of the definitions of the NIEM and the scope of the IEPD itself. That's okay, because more information is better. So these are potential extra things that could be in an IEPD. So now we're to the step of packaging an IEPD. Assuming we've done all our steps up until now, and we've made all the artifacts we needed, and we went through all the proper process steps to get to having all the artifacts we need, now what do we do with it? Well, now we need to package it together. There's a lot of flexibility allowed in the folder structure and file organization of an IEPD when you package it all together. Unless you have a dire need, though, I recommend you follow the recommended file and folder structure. It just makes sense. It makes it easier for other people to consume your IEPD. To do this automatically, use GTRI's Work with IEPDs tool, which does exactly what it says, lets you work with IEPDs. But what it lets you do is upload the various artifacts to an account that you make on their server. And when you have all your artifacts uploaded and the types of each artifact, then you click a generate button and it'll put it all together in the right folder structure. Put the catalog file in there automatically, wrap it all up in a zip file, which is essentially what IEPDs are. And when you really think about it, they're a big zip file full of artifacts. It'll put all that together, put everything in the right place, make the catalog file, zip it all up, and return it to you. And then you'll have everything in the right spot.